Have you ever wondered what you would do if your carefully constructed life was destroyed in a single moment? And if the person who destroyed it reappeared years later, expecting to find you broken and diminished, but found you a completely different person than expected, how would you act? Some secrets can't stay hidden forever, and when the truth comes out, it will force everyone to confront the consequences of choices made in anger, pride, and fear. Deborah Wilson stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her Seattle penthouse, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. The Space Needle pierced through the colorful canvas like a sentinel, standing guard over the city she'd called home for the past decade. In her hands, she held a glass of champagne that had long since gone flat, much like her perfect life was about to. The dining room behind her was meticulously decorated for their 10th anniversary celebration. White roses, her favorite. White tea adorned the center of their glass dining table, and expensive china gleamed under the modern chandelier. The catering team had just left after setting up an elaborate dinner for two. Every detail planned to perfection, just as Michael liked it. Michael, her husband of 10 years, the brilliant CEO of TechVision, and the man whose smartwatch was currently burning a hole in her palm. She'd noticed it on the bathroom counter when she was getting ready, its screen lighting up with incoming messages. She hadn't meant to look. Trust had always been their foundation. But the preview of the message caught her eye. "Can't wait to feel your lips on mine again, baby." The sender was Jessica Porter, Michael's newly promoted chief marketing officer. Deborah's hands trembled as she scrolled through the message history. Months of conversations, intimate photos, and detailed accounts of their encounters during business trips unfolded before her eyes. The truth hit her like a physical blow. While she'd been working late nights as CTO of her own tech company, trying to maintain their power couple status, her husband had been building a different life with someone else. The sound of the front door opening echoed through the apartment. "Honey, I'm home." Michael's voice carried its usual confidence, the sound of success and privilege. "Something smells amazing." Deborah didn't turn around. She heard his footsteps approach, felt his presence behind her. There's my beautiful wife," he said, wrapping his arms around her waist. The familiar gesture now felt like a stranger's touch. "Is there something you want to tell me, Michael?" Her voice was steady, surprising even herself. She held up his smartwatch, the screen still displaying Jessica's messages. The silence that followed was deafening. His arms dropped from her waist as if she'd burned him. When she finally turned to face him, his handsome features had transformed into a mask of guilt and defiance. "Deborah, I can explain," he started, running a hand through his perfectly styled dark hair. "It's not what you think." "Really?" She laughed, but it was a hollow sound. "Because I think it's exactly what it looks like. You and Jessica, how long?" 8 months, he admitted after a long pause. His eyes darted away from hers, a tell she recognized from their poker nights with friends. "But Deborah, our marriage has been struggling for years. We both know that. Struggling because I worked hard, because I supported your dreams and built mine alongside them." She gestured to the romantic setup around them. "I've been planning this evening for months, Michael. I wanted to reconnect, to celebrate us." "Deborah, please." His voice took on that patronizing tone she'd heard him use in board meetings. "Let's be realistic. We've grown apart. Jessica understands me in a way you never could." Deborah noticed something in his expression she hadn't seen before. Not just guilt or defensiveness, but a kind of desperate relief. "What do you mean by that?" Michael sighed, loosening his tie. "You're brilliant, Deborah. You always have been, but you're so driven, so independent. Jessica makes me feel needed. She looks up to me, depends on me." The realization struck her. His affair wasn't just about physical attraction. It was about his ego, his need to feel superior. In their marriage of equals, Michael had started to feel diminished by her success. The champagne glass shattered against the floor, crystal shards scattering across imported marble. "Get out," she whispered, then louder, "Get out!" "This is my home too," he protested. But she could see the relief in his eyes. Relief at finally being discovered, at no longer having to pretend. Not anymore. Deborah walked to the door, her heels clicking against the floor with each determined step. "I'll have my lawyer contact yours tomorrow. I hope she was worth it, Michael." As the door closed behind him, Deborah slid down, against it, her perfectly tailored anniversary dress pooling around her. Through the windows, she could see the last rays of sunset disappearing behind the Seattle skyline. Her perfect life had just crumbled. But somewhere deep inside, beneath the pain and humiliation, a small voice whispered that maybe this ending was just the beginning of something new. The following weeks passed in a blur of cardboard boxes and legal documents. Deborah chose to leave the penthouse behind, taking only what she truly needed. The modern furniture, the art collection they'd curated together, the matching his and hers luxury cars, none of it mattered anymore. She found a modest two-bedroom apartment in Queen Anne, close enough to both their companies that the gossip would be unavoidable, but she refused to be driven away from the city she loved. The morning sickness hit her just as she was settling into her new routine. At first, she dismissed it as stress, but after a week of running to the bathroom every morning, she scheduled an appointment with her doctor. The waiting room at Seattle Women's Clinic was quiet that Tuesday morning, with only a few other patients thumbing through outdated magazines. "Ms. Wilson," the nurse called, leading her to an examination room. "Dr. Martinez will be with you shortly." Deborah sat on the examination table, the paper crinkling beneath her. The walls were covered with posters about women's health, and she found herself staring at one about pregnancy symptoms, a cold realization washing over her. Dr. Martinez entered with her usual warm smile. "Deborah, it's been a while. What brings you in today?" After describing her symptoms, Deborah watched as the doctor's expression shifted from professional interest to gentle concern. "Oi, let's run some tests," she suggested, "just to be sure." The pregnancy test was positive, but it was the ultrasound that changed everything. "Well, Deborah," Dr. Martinez said, moving the wand across her still flat stomach, "I'm seeing 2 distinct heartbeats. Congratulations, you're carrying twins." The world seemed to stop spinning for a moment. Twins. The word echoed in her mind as she stared at the grainy images on the screen. 2 tiny fluttering hearts beating in perfect synchronization. "I'm about 6 weeks along," Deborah asked, doing the mental math. The timing meant they were conceived during the last time she and Michael had been intimate, just before she discovered his affair. "That's correct." Dr. Martinez squeezed her hand. "I know this is a lot to process, especially given your current situation. Would you like to discuss your options?" Deborah touched the screen gently, tracing the outline of her babies. "No," she said firmly. "These babies are mine. They're my future." That evening, as she sat on her new balcony watching the sunset, a daily ritual she couldn't give up, Deborah made a decision. Michael wouldn't know about the twins, not yet. He'd made his choice when he moved in. With Jessica, flaunting their relationship across Seattle's tech community mere weeks after the separation. The following day, she met with her lawyer, a sharp-witted woman named Rebecca, who had guided her through the initial separation. "You're pregnant," Rebecca confirmed, making notes. "With twins, and you don't want Michael to know yet. Is that legal?" Deborah asked. "To not tell him?" Rebecca sighed. "Technically, you're not obligated to inform him during the pregnancy. But once they're born, he has paternal rights unless you can prove he's unfit. And from what you've told me, being an unfaithful husband doesn't make him an unfit father in the eyes of the law." "I understand," Deborah said, her hand instinctively moving to her stomach. I just need time. Time to figure out what kind of life I can provide for them on my own. That night, Deborah received an unexpected visitor. Eleanor Wilson, Michael's mother, stood at her doorstep with a small potted orchid. "May I come in?" Eleanor asked, her elegant posture betraying none of the awkwardness of the situation. Deborah hesitated but stepped aside. Eleanor had always been kind to her, a cool but fair woman who had built her own accounting firm from nothing after immigrating from Taiwan. "Michael told me what happened," Eleanor said once they were seated in Deborah's small living room. His version, at least." "And what version is that?" Deborah asked, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. "That you grew apart. That you were both unhappy." Eleanor's sharp eyes missed nothing as she scanned Deborah's face. "But I've known my son for 40 years. He runs when things get hard. His father was the same way." Deborah felt tears threatening and blinked them back. I don't know what you want me to say." "Nothing. I came to tell you that whatever happens between you two, you have my respect and my support, if you need it." Eleanor placed a business card on the coffee table. "My private number. Not that I expect you to use it." As Eleanor rose to leave, Deborah felt a sudden impulse. "I'm pregnant," she blurted out. "With twins." Eleanor froze, her composure slipping for just a moment. "Does Michael know?" "No, and I'd like to keep it that way, for now." The older woman studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. "Your secret is safe with me." At the door, she paused. "My son made a terrible mistake. Deborah, someday, he'll realize that." With the door closed behind Eleanor, Deborah placed a hand on her stomach, still flat but now holding the greatest secret of her life. "It's just us now, little ones," she whispered to the evening air. "But we're going to be okay. Better than okay. We're going to be amazing." While most women might have been overwhelmed by the prospect of launching a business while pregnant with twins, Deborah Wilson saw it as the perfect distraction from her crumbling personal life. Her reputation in Seattle's tech industry was impeccable, and her network was extensive. Within weeks of leaving TechVision, she had transformed her apartment's second bedroom into a home office and founded Wilson Consulting Group. The morning sickness subsided just as she landed her first major client, a promising startup needing guidance on their AI implementation. Deborah worked tirelessly, taking video calls from her apartment and conducting in-person meetings while her pregnancy was still easily concealed by loose-fitting blazers. "You're absolutely certain about this direction?" she asked during a client meeting, her hand unconsciously resting on her growing bump beneath the conference table. "Because once we implement this architecture, reverting will be costly." The client, a young CEO with more funding than experience, nodded eagerly. "We trust your judgment, Deborah. Your track record speaks for itself." Reality hit hard 3 weeks later when the same client called in a panic. Their primary investor had pulled out, citing strategic differences, leaving them unable to pay Deborah's consulting fee. It was her third setback that month. Another client had downsized their project scope, and a potential enterprise deal had fallen through at the last minute. Deborah slumped in her chair after the call ended, one hand on her now visible bump. "Don't worry," she told the twins. "We still have savings. We'll figure this out." That evening, her doorbell rang. The visitor was Alexander Kim, a venture capitalist she'd met at several industry events before her separation from Michael. "I heard you started your own firm," he said, standing awkwardly in her doorway with a plant in his hands. "Housewarming gift. It's a peace lily, supposedly impossible to kill, which is good for busy entrepreneurs." Deborah accepted the plant with a surprised laugh. "Thanks, but how did you know where I live?" "Eleanor Wilson told me," he admitted. "We serve on the Asian American Business Alliance board together." She mentioned you might be looking for connections in the VC world, Deborah invited, him in shotboys, curious about this unexpected ally. Alexander was tall with thoughtful eyes behind stylish glasses, dressed casually in jeans and a button-down. Over tea, he explained his interest. I specialize in funding companies with social, impact components, he said. When Eleanor mentioned you were branching out on your own, I thought there might be synergy. I'm just a tech consultant, Deborah replied. Not sure where the social impact is. Alexander leaned forward. The way I see it, you have an opportunity to build something different. The tech industry is notoriously unfriendly to parents, especially mothers. What if your consulting firm addressed that gap? The idea took root as they talked. By the time Alexander left, Deborah had the beginnings of a business model that could distinguish her from countless other consulting firms, one that would integrate family-friendly policies into the very DNA of tech companies. The following months weren't easy. Deborah's growing pregnancy made networking events exhausting, and potential clients sometimes visibly hesitated when they saw her condition. For every contract she secured, 2 others fell through. Her savings dwindled faster than anticipated, yet she persisted, refining her pitch with each rejection. Alexander introduced her to potential clients who valued diversity and work-life balance, and slowly, her client roster grew. They maintained a strictly professional relationship. Daché, though Deborah noticed his attention to her comfort, bringing decaffeinated tea to meetings, finding venues with comfortable seating, and always ending on time. The nursery planning became her evening project, a way to channel her nervous energy into something positive. She chose a gender-neutral theme of stars and moons, painting one wall herself, despite her protruding belly making it increasingly difficult to reach the higher spots. You're doing too much, her mother warned during their weekly video calls from San Francisco. Let me come help. But Deborah insisted on maintaining her independence. I'm fine, Mom. The doctors say the babies are healthy, and work is going well. The half-truth came easily. Her parents had enough worries without adding her financial struggles to the list. The twins arrived on a rainy Seattle morning in early spring, 2 weeks earlier than expected. After 18 hours of labor, Deborah held her son and daughter for the first time, their tiny faces perfect and peaceful. Lucas and Lily, she whispered. The names she'd chosen months ago finally belonging to real, breathing humans. Yet even in their first moments, their differences were apparent. Lucas, born first, had entered the world quietly, his dark eyes wide and observant. Lily had arrived 7 minutes later with an indignant wail, tiny fists clenched as if ready to fight. As she cradled them in the hospital room, watching their chests rise and fall with each breath, Deborah felt a profound shift in her universe. The betrayal that had seemed so devastating less than a year ago now felt like a distant memory. In its place was something far more powerful: the fierce, protective love of a mother. The nurses showed her how to tandem breastfeed, a skill that would prove crucial in the coming months. She sent a single photo to Eleanor, who arrived the next day with practical gifts: nursing tops, swaddle blankets, and a check that made Deborah's eyes widen. Consider it their college fund, Eleanor said firmly when Deborah tried to refuse. My first grandchildren deserve security. By the time Deborah brought the twins home, her modest apartment seemed impossibly small. The nursery she'd lovingly prepared could barely fit 2 cribs, and her home office had been reduced to a desk in the corner of her bedroom. The reality of raising twins alone while running a fledgling business struck her with full force that first night, as Lucas wailed with colic while Lily needed feeding. We can do this, she whispered through tears of exhaustion, wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake thinking she could manage alone. 3 months after the twins' birth, Deborah faced a critical decision. Her largest client had requested on-site work 3 days a week, impossible with her childcare situation. The part-time nanny she'd hired, A grandmother figure named Rose could only cover 2 days, and Deborah's savings were nearly depleted. "I don't know what to do," she admitted to Alexander during one of his now regular visits. They'd settled into a friendship that centered around business advice and, increasingly, the twins. Alexander had a surprising knack with babies, particularly Lucas, who quieted immediately in his arms. "Bring them with you," Alexander suggested, gently rocking Lucas while Deborah fed Lily. "Create a pilot program. Show them how on-site childcare could work." "That's absurd," Deborah started, then paused. "Or is it?" 2 weeks later, Deborah presented her client with an unconventional proposal, a workspace that included a secure area for the twins, and Rose. To her surprise, the company's female CEO enthusiastically agreed. "Do you know how many talented mothers we've lost because they couldn't find flexible child care?" the CEO asked. "This could be revolutionary." That experiment became the seed of Little Bridges, a program Deborah developed that created infant-friendly workspaces within corporate environments. Rather than separating work and family life completely, Little Bridges built connections between them, allowing parents to remain productive while staying connected to their children. As the twins approached their first birthday, Wilson Consulting Group had evolved. Beyond technical consulting, Deborah now specialized in helping companies implement family-friendly policies that improved retention and productivity. Her client list grew steadily, though financially she still walked a precarious line between success and failure. The twins' personalities continued to diverge. Lucas was thoughtful and cautious, content to observe for hours before attempting new skills. Lily was fearless, grabbing life with both hands, the first to crawl, stand, and tumble. Their differences fascinated Deborah, who sometimes wondered which traits came from her and which from Michael. Michael remained unaware of his children's existence, having moved to TechVision's New York office shortly after the divorce was finalized. Deborah occasionally saw his name in industry news or spotted him in Jessica's social media posts. Expensive vacations, gala events, the life of carefree success she once shared. Eleanor visited regularly, delighting in her grandchildren's growth. During one such visit, while the twins napped, she broached the subject Deborah had been avoiding. "He has a right to know, Deborah," Eleanor said gently. "And they have a right to know their father." "I'll tell him," Deborah promised. "When they're older. When my business is stable enough that he can't threaten everything I've built." The conversation was interrupted by Deborah's phone. One of her largest clients was backing out of their contract, citing budget cuts. The loss would decimate her already tight finances. That night, after Eleanor left, and the twins were asleep, Deborah allowed herself 10 minutes of panic, pacing her small living room as worst-case scenarios played through her mind. Then she straightened her shoulders, opened her laptop, and began working on a new business strategy. Alexander arrived unannounced the next morning with coffee and pastries. "Eleanor called me," he explained. "Thought you might need a friend." Deborah's exhaustion crumbled her usual composure. "I'm failing, Alex. The business is struggling. I barely see the twins because I'm working constantly. And I'm one client away from having to move back in with my parents." Alexander set down the coffee and faced her squarely. "You're not failing. You're creating something new, and that's never easy." He hesitated. "I have a proposition. My fund is looking to invest in companies with innovative workplace models. Let me invest in Wilson Consulting Group." "I can't take your money," Deborah protested. "Not as a friend." "Not as a friend," he clarified. "Nay, as a business partner who believes in what you're building. We'll do this properly. Pitch deck, business plan, the works." "But Deborah, what you're creating with Little Bridges isn't just a consulting service. It's a movement." With Alexander's investment, Deborah was able to hire 2 additional consultants and rent a small office space that included an area for the twins and other employees. Children. Little Bridges evolved from a concept into a concrete program with measurable metrics showing improved retention and productivity in the companies that implemented it. As the twins reached 18 months, Deborah finally felt like she was finding her rhythm. The business was stable, not yet profitable, but growing steadily. Lucas had become a curious toddler who loved books and building blocks, while Lily charmed everyone with her adventurous spirit and infectious laugh. And Alexander had become a constant in their lives, a supportive business partner, a trusted friend, and increasingly, something more that Deborah wasn't yet ready to define. The annual Tech Vanguard Conference in San Francisco marked a milestone for Wilson Consulting Group. 2 years after its founding, the company had been invited to present its Little Bridges program as a case study in workplace innovation. For Deborah, now 35, too, it was validation of the path she'd chosen. "You ready for this?" Alexander asked as they waited backstage. Their relationship had evolved over the past 6 months, transitioning carefully from business partners to something deeper. He adjusted his tie nervously, more concerned about her presentation than he had been about his own earlier that day. "As ready as I'll ever be," Deborah replied, reviewing her notes one last time. The twins, now 2.5, were back in Seattle with Rose and Deborah's parents, who had flown in to help. It was her first trip away from them, and the separation anxiety gnawed at her despite daily video calls, where Lucas showed off new words and Lily performed dramatic twirls. The presentation was a success. Deborah spoke confidently about the data they'd collected. Employee retention up 32% in companies implementing Little Bridges. Productivity metrics showing working parents performing at or above their childless peers when given appropriate support, and the psychological benefits of reduced parental separation anxiety. "The future of work isn't about separating family and career," she concluded. "It's about building bridges between them." The applause was gratifying, but even more so were the business cards thrust into her hands afterward. HR executives, CTOs, and CEOs interested in implementing her program. Alexander fielded questions while Deborah scheduled follow-up meetings, the partnership they'd developed functioning seamlessly. "Let's celebrate tonight," Alexander suggested as the crowd thinned. "That Italian place by the waterfront?" Deborah agreed, riding the wave of professional achievement. She was headed to the hotel to change when a familiar voice stopped her cold. "Deborah? Is that really you?" She turned to face Michael, her ex-husband standing just feet away. 3 years had changed him. Subtle creases around his eyes, and a hint of silver at his temples, but he still carried himself with the same confidence that had once attracted her. "Michael," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt, "I didn't know you were attending." "I'm speaking tomorrow on emerging AI ethics." His eyes traveled over her, taking in the changes motherhood and entrepreneurship had wrought. "You look amazing. I saw your presentation. Little Bridges is impressive." "Thank you." Deborah noticed the woman hovering uncertainly behind Michael. Jessica, looking less polished than in her social media posts, her smile tight as she assessed the interaction. Deborah, this is Jessica, We've met," Deborah interrupted, unwilling to hear whatever label he might assign. She extended a professional handshake to the woman who had once been her husband's affair partner. "Nice to see you again." Jessica returned the handshake weakly. Congratulations on your success." An awkward silence followed, broken when Alexander appeared at Deborah's side, his hand instinctively finding the small of her back. "Everything okay here?" he asked, reading the tension instantly. "Fine," Deborah said, grateful for his presence. "Michael, Jessica, this is Alexander Kim, my business partner." The men exchanged measured handshakes, sizing each other up with the wariness of territorial animals. "We should get going," Deborah said finally. "We have dinner reservations." Michael nodded, but as they turned to leave, he called after her. Deborah, I've been seeing your company in the news. The work you're doing, it's remarkable. I'd love to catch up properly, maybe tomorrow. For coffee? Something in his tone, a hint of the charm that had once captivated her, made Deborah pause. I don't think that's a good idea, Michael. Take care. At dinner, Deborah pushed the encounter aside, focusing instead on their success and the opportunities ahead. But that night in her hotel room, she found herself scrolling through photos of the twins, struck by Lucas's eyes, so much like his father's. The guilt she'd carried for keeping them a secret suddenly felt heavier. She called Eleanor. You saw him? The older woman guessed immediately. Yes, Deborah sighed. And now I feel terrible for not telling him. Perhaps it's time, Eleanor suggested gently. On your terms, before circumstances force your hand. The next morning, Deborah spotted Michael alone in the hotel restaurant. Jessica nowhere, in sight. Making a decision she hoped wouldn't haunt her, she approached his table. About that coffee, she said. I have an hour before my next meeting. Over espresso in a quiet corner of the hotel lobby, Deborah studied the man she'd once loved enough to marry. Behind the polished exterior, she detected something new, a vulnerability, perhaps even regret. How have you been, really? He asked. I've been... Deborah hesitated. I've rebuilt my life, Michael. It wasn't easy, but I'm proud of what I've created. Michael nodded, turning his coffee cup slowly. I see that. Everyone's talking about your program. He paused. Jessica and I are having problems. She's been pressing for marriage, kids, but I keep hesitating. Deborah recognized the pattern. Michael seeking sympathy, making his problems the center of attention. Once, she would have offered comfort or advice. Now, she saw it clearly for what it was. That's between you and Jessica, she said firmly. Michael looked startled, then chastened. You're right. I'm sorry. He straightened in his chair, seeming to gather his courage. Truth is, I've been doing a lot of thinking lately. About us. About the mistakes I made. I was a fool, Deborah. I threw away something real for something that wasn't. The confession hung in the air between them. 3 years ago, Deborah would have given anything to hear those words. Now, they landed with surprising hollowness. Why are you telling me this? She asked. Oh, because I want you to know I understand what I lost. His eyes met hers. And because I saw you with that guy, Alexander, and I felt, I don't know. I just wanted you to know I regret how things ended. Deborah took a deep breath. Michael, there's something you need to know. She pulled out her phone, opened a recent photo of Lucas and Lily in the backyard playground Alexander had built for them, and slid it across the table. Michael stared at the image, confusion, giving way to shock as he recognized his own features reflected in the children's faces. Are they? He whispered. Yes. Deborah's heart pounded. Twins, Lucas and Lily. They're 2.5. 2.5, he repeated numbly, doing the math. You were pregnant when we separated. When I left. His voice rose. You kept my children from me for almost 3 years. Dedita? I found out after you left, Deborah clarified, keeping her voice low despite the anger flaring in his eyes. By then, you were already living with Jessica, parading around Seattle like you'd won some prize. You made your choice, Michael. My choice. His face flushed. I didn't even know there was a choice to make. He grabbed the phone, staring at the image. Lee, Lucas and Lily, he said, testing their names. I have a son and daughter I've never met. Deborah reclaimed her phone. Now you know. Now I know. Michael's shock was hardening into anger. That's it. Now I know. And what? You go back to Seattle and continue keeping them from me. I'm not keeping them from you, Deborah said. though the words felt like a half-truth. "I'm protecting them." "From their father?" Michael's voice cracked. "You had no right, Deborah, no right at all." As he stormed from the lobby, Deborah sat frozen, wondering if she'd just made a terrible mistake. Within an hour, she had her answer. A text from Michael. "My lawyer will contact yours tomorrow." The legal notice arrived 3 days after Deborah returned to Seattle. Michael was petitioning for shared custody and demanding immediate visitation rights with Lucas and Lily. "He's angry," Rebecca, Deborah's lawyer, explained as they reviewed the documents in her downtown office. "Agreed, and legally, he has grounds. You kept his biological children from him for over 2 years." "What are my options?" Deborah asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. Rebecca sighed. "We can argue that introduction should be gradual, supervised. But unless you can prove he's an unfit parent, the court will likely grant him some form of custody arrangement." The prospect of sharing her children, of sending Lucas and Lily to stay with a virtual stranger, filled Deborah with dread. That evening, as she watched them play in the living room of their modest house, a recent upgrade from the apartment, she tried to imagine explaining Michael to them. Lucas was methodically stacking blocks into an intricate tower, his brow furrowed in concentration. At 2.5, he was already showing signs of the analytical mind Deborah recognized in herself. Deliberate, thoughtful, focused. Beside him, Lily danced to music only she could hear, her curly hair bouncing with each twirl, occasionally stopping to knock over her brother's creation with a mischievous giggle. "Lily, no!" Lucas protested as his tower collapsed. "Sorry, sorry," Lily sang without sounding sorry at all, already moving on to her next adventure. How would Michael fit into this carefully constructed world? Would he understand Lucas's need for routine or Lily's wild creativity? Would he have the patience for Lucas's quiet observations or the energy for Lily's constant motion? The doorbell interrupted her thoughts. Alexander stood on the porch, concern etched across his features. "Eleanor called me," he explained. "She said Michael's seeking custody." Deborah nodded, letting him in. The twins rushed to greet him. "Uncle Alex?" Their small bodies colliding with his legs. He scooped them up, one in each arm, with the practiced ease of someone who'd done it countless times. "Monster ride," eyed Lily demanded, while Lucas simply rested his head on Alexander's shoulder, content with the quiet connection. "Later, munchkins," Alexander promised, setting them down. "I need to talk to your mom first." Once the twins were engrossed, in a cartoon, Deborah collapsed onto the couch beside Alexander, finally allowing herself to voice her fears. "What if he takes them from me? What if the court decides I was wrong to keep them from him?" Alexander took her hand. "We'll fight this, Deborah. Together." The word held weight, an unspoken question about their future. "Have you considered offering Michael a compromise? Something that protects the twins while acknowledging his rights?" "Like what?" Deborah asked. "Supervised visitation to start. A gradual introduction." Alexander hesitated. "I know a child psychologist who specializes in reunification. She could help create a plan that puts the twins first." The following month was a blur of legal consultations and emotional preparation. Deborah worked with Dr. Levinson, the psychologist Alexander had recommended, to develop a plan for introducing Michael to the twins. Simultaneously, she fought to keep Wilson Consulting Group running, grateful for her small but dedicated team who stepped up when she needed to attend court hearings. The first mediation session was tense. Michael arrived with his lawyer, Edis, an aggressive family attorney known for winning difficult custody cases. Deborah and Rebecca presented their proposed introduction plan, supervised visits increasing gradually over 6 months before any overnight stays would be considered. "Ooh, 6 months," Michael scoffed. They're my children. I've already lost nearly 3 years. Nay, 3 years that were your choice, Deborah countered. You left our marriage for another woman. You moved to New York without a backward glance. Because I didn't know about them. Michael's fist hit the table. If I had known… what? Deborah interrupted. What would you have done differently? Stayed in a marriage you clearly didn't want. Tried to parent part-time while building your new life with Jessica. The mediator intervened before the exchange could escalate further. Mr. Wilson, Miss Wilson, please remember that the goal here is to find an arrangement that serves the children's best interests. By the end of the session, they had reached a tentative agreement. Michael would meet the twins first in their home environment, with Dr. Levinson present, followed by weekly supervised visits. After 3 months, they would reassess. The night before Michael's first visit, Deborah barely slept. She had explained to the twins, in simple terms appropriate for their age, that they would be meeting someone special tomorrow, their father, who had been living far away but wanted very much to meet them. Shh, like Grandma and Grandpa in San Francisco? Lucas had asked, trying to fit this new information into his orderly worldview. A bit different, Deborah had explained. Your father is my former husband. We used to live together, but now we live apart. Why? Lily demanded, always direct. Deborah had taken a deep breath. Sometimes grown-ups realize they can't live together anymore, even though they still care about their children very much. The morning of the visit arrived with rain pattering against the windows, typical Seattle weather that matched Deborah's stormy emotions. She dressed the twins in outfits that were nice but comfortable, wanting them to look their best but also feel secure. At precisely 10 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Dr. Levinson arrived first, offering Deborah a reassuring smile before reviewing the plan one last time. 10 minutes later, Michael stood on her doorstep, clutching a gift bag in each hand, looking more nervous than she'd ever seen him. They're playing in the living room, Deborah said, leading him inside. Dr. Levinson will be with you. The whole time? I'll be in the Kit Wilson if they need me. Michael nodded, his usual confidence nowhere to be found. As they entered the living room, both twins looked up, Lucas from his puzzle, Lily from the dollhouse. For a moment, no one moved. Then Lily, ever fearless, approached. Are you our daddy? She asked, tilting her head to study him. Michael knelt down to her level, his voice thick with emotion. Yes, I am. I'm Lily. I'm this many. She held up 3 fingers, then corrected herself by folding one down. 2.5. It's very nice to meet you, Lily, Michael said, offering her gift bag. I brought you something. Lucas remained by the puzzle, watching cautiously until Deborah gave him an encouraging nod. Slowly, he approached, standing slightly behind his sister. And you must be Lucas, Michael said gently. I have something for you, too. The first meeting lasted an hour, awkward at times, touching at others. Deborah watched from the doorway as Michael discovered Lucas's love of puzzles, like himself, and Lily's theatrical tendencies, so different from his own reserved nature. When it was time for him to leave, Lily offered a hug while Lucas managed a high five. After Michael left, Deborah found herself unexpectedly emotional. Seeing her children with their father, watching them discover parts of themselves reflected in him, was both beautiful and painful. You did the right thing, Dr. Levinson assured her. This won't be easy, but the children deserve to know both their parents. That night, Alexander came over after the twins were asleep, bringing takeout and a sympathetic ear. As they sat on her porch swing watching the rain, Deborah finally voiced the fear that had been growing since Michael's reappearance. What if he decides he wants them full-time? What if he tries to take them to New York? What if he uses his resources to fight me for primary custody? Alexander wrapped an arm around her shoulders. Then we fight back, he said simply. But Deborah, I saw how he looked at them today. He was overwhelmed, terrified even. Whatever his initial reaction, I think he's realizing that parenting isn't something you can just jump into overnight. I hope you're right, Deborah whispered, leaning against him as the rain continued to fall, washing away the day and ushering in an uncertain future. The following 6 months unfolded in a series of careful negotiations and adjustments. Michael's weekly visits with the twins became a fixture in their routine, gradually shifting from supervised to independent as his confidence as a father grew. Deborah watched with mixed emotions as Lucas and Lily developed their own unique relationships with him. Lucas, ever analytical, approached his father with cautious curiosity. He discovered they shared a love of strategy games and building things, lighting up when Michael brought increasingly complex puzzle sets. Lily, meanwhile, had Michael wrapped around her finger within weeks, charming him with her theatrical performances and uninhibited affection. "She's exactly like you," Michael remarked one Sunday evening as he prepared to leave after his visit. "So fearless." Deborah raised an eyebrow. "I always thought she got that from you." The comment lingered between them, a reminder that these children were pieces of both of them, regardless of the past. The custody arrangement they eventually settled on was far from what Michael had initially demanded. He dropped his petition for shared physical custody after a tense mediation session where his lawyer presented his work schedule, revealing 60-hour weeks and frequent international travel. "You can't have it both ways, Michael," Deborah had pointed out. "You can't be the high-powered CEO and have 3-year-olds half the time." In the end, they agreed to regular weekend visits, with Michael flying to Seattle twice monthly. The arrangement strained his relationship with Jessica, who had expected the twins to integrate into their New York life. By autumn, industry gossip confirmed what Deborah had suspected. Michael and Jessica had separated. Meanwhile, Wilson Consulting Group continued its growth trajectory, though not without challenges. A competitor launched a similar workplace program, triggering a minor client exodus. Deborah responded by doubling down on Littlebridge's evidence-based approach, commissioning a formal study with the University of Washington to document the program's impact on employee retention and productivity. "We're not just selling a feel-good concept," she explained to her team during a strategy meeting. "We're transforming workplace culture with measurable outcomes." The company had expanded to 15 employees, outgrowing their small office. Finding appropriate space, one that could accommodate both professional needs and the Littlebridges program, proved challenging within their budget constraints. After weeks of searching, Alexander proposed an unconventional solution. "No, the building next to my apartment complex is for sale," he mentioned during dinner at Deborah's house, after the twins were asleep. "It's a former community center with great bones, but it needs renovation. My fund could purchase it as an investment property and lease it to Wilson Consulting at below market rate." Deborah hesitated. Their relationship had deepened over the past year, but maintaining professional boundaries remained important. "That sounds like a conflict of interest," Alexander smiled. "It is. That's why I'd recuse myself from the investment decision." He reached for her hand. "Deborah, I believe in what you're building, not just as your—" He paused, searching for the right word. "As my what, exactly?" Deborah asked, the question they'd been dancing around for months finally surfacing. "As the man who loves you," Alexander said simply, "and Lucas and Lily." The moment hung between them, years of friendship and support crystallizing into something more defined. "I love you too," Deborah admitted. "But this is complicated. The twins, Michael, the business. Life is complicated," Alexander agreed. But some things are worth figuring out." The decision to blend their personal and professional lives wasn't one they took lightly. Alexander formally recused himself from any funding decisions related to Wilson Consulting Group, and they, established clear boundaries to maintain the integrity of their business relationship. Personally, they moved forward carefully, mindful of the twins, attachment to Uncle Alex, and the transition to him becoming a more permanent fixture in their lives. Their caution proved wise when Michael reacted poorly to news of their relationship, questioning Alexander's motives and suggesting Deborah was replacing him in the twins' lives. "Amoy, he's been there since they were born," Deborah reminded Michael during a particularly heated phone call. "He's been a constant support when you were completely absent." "Because you kept them from me," Michael shot back, the old argument. Resurfacing. Deborah took a deep breath, choosing her next words carefully. "That's true. I made a mistake not telling you sooner, but Alexander has earned his place in their lives, just as you're earning yours now." The conversation marked a turning point in their co-parenting relationship. For the first time, both acknowledged their failings. Deborah in keeping the twins' existence secret, Michael in creating the situation that led to their separation in the first place. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but a mutual recognition of complicated truths. As winter approached, bringing Seattle's characteristic gray skies and steady drizzle, Deborah faced her greatest professional challenge yet. Their primary investor pulled funding unexpectedly, citing market volatility. The newly renovated office space stood half-finished, and payroll loomed with insufficient funds to cover it. "We have 3 options," Deborah told Alexander over a late dinner at her Kit Wilson table. Financial statements spread between them. "Lay off half the team, seek emergency bridge funding, or I take no salary for the next 6 months." "Or option 4, Alexander countered. "You accept the acquisition offer from Mindful Tech." Mindful Tech, a rapidly growing HR solutions company, had approached Deborah the previous month with an offer to purchase Wilson Consulting Group and integrate Little Bridges into their suite of workplace wellness products. The offer was generous, but accepting it would mean surrendering control of the program she'd built from nothing. "I can't sell," Deborah insisted. "Little Bridges isn't just a product, it's a mission." "Then don't sell," Alexander said. "Partner, negotiate to maintain creative control while gaining their distribution network and capital." The negotiations with Mindful Tech consumed the next 3 weeks. Deborah fought for terms that would preserve the integrity of Little Bridges while securing her team's future and expanding their impact. The final agreement designated her as Chief Innovation Officer of the newly formed Little Bridges division, with significant autonomy and an equity stake in the parent company. The day she signed the contract was bittersweet, a triumph tinged with the recognition that her independent company was now part of something larger. That evening, she shared the news with Michael during his regular video call with the twins. "Congratulations," he said, surprising her with his sincerity. "You built something remarkable, Deborah. Something that will help working parents everywhere." His acknowledgement meant more than she expected. Whatever their past, Michael understood the business world and the significance of what she'd achieved. As the twins took over the call, chattering about their day at preschool, Deborah felt a sense of completion. Not an ending, but the closing of one chapter and the beginning of another. Later that night, she stood on her back porch watching the Seattle skyline, much as she had that fateful evening 3 years earlier when her life had shattered. Alexander joined her, wrapping a blanket around their shoulders against the winter chill. "Penny for your thoughts," he murmured. "I was just thinking about how different my life is from what I'd planned," Deborah replied, leaning against him. "And how much better in ways I never could have imagined." The playground buzzed with activity, children darting between swings and slides while parents clustered in conversational groups nearby. Deborah sat on a bench watching Lucas, now 5.5, methodically construct an elaborate sandcastle. His architectural precision was impressive. Each tower and wall carefully measured and executed. "Mom, watch this," Lily called. From the top of the climbing structure, her curly hair wild in the breeze. Before Deborah could respond, Lily launched herself down the tallest slide with characteristic fearlessness, landing in a triumphant pose at the bottom. "I saw. Great job!" Deborah applauded, her heart still skipping a beat at her daughter's daredevil tendencies. Beside her, 13-month-old Emma babbled in her stroller, reaching pudgy hands toward her siblings with obvious admiration. Alexander appeared with coffee from the nearby cart. "One decaf latte for the CEO," he said, kissing her cheek before settling beside her. "How's the speech coming?" Deborah sighed. "Still needs work. How do I compress 3 years of Little Bridges impact into a 10-minute keynote?" The upcoming Workplace Innovation Summit had selected Deborah as their keynote speaker, recognizing Little Bridges' transformation of corporate childcare policies. What had begun as her desperate solution as a single mother had evolved into a movement, with over 200 companies nationwide implementing some version of the program. "You'll find the words," Alexander assured her. "You always do." Their conversation paused as a familiar figure approached across the playground. Michael walked confidently toward them, carrying gift bags and wearing the slightly awkward expression he still got around Alexander, despite 3 years of co-parenting. "Daddy!" Lily spotted him first, racing across the playground and launching herself into his arms. Lucas followed more sedately, but his smile was equally genuine. "I brought your birthday presents," Michael announced. "Sorry I missed the party yesterday." "Business trip," Lucas stated matter-of-factly. "Oh? To Tokyo." "That's right," Michael confirmed, impressed by his son's memory. "But I'm here for the whole weekend now." The past 3 years had changed Michael. The divorce from Jessica had forced self-reflection, and his relationship with the twins had softened his more rigid edges. He had relocated TechVision's headquarters back to Seattle 18 months earlier, choosing proximity to his children over New York's business advantages. Though still demanding and driven, in his professional life, fatherhood had taught him priorities beyond work. His relationship with Deborah and Alexander remained cordial, if not warm. They had established functional co-parenting boundaries, always putting the twins' needs first. When Deborah and Alexander married 2 years earlier, Michael had attended the small ceremony, acknowledging with surprising grace that Alexander made Deborah happy in ways he never had. Emma's birth had initially triggered tension, Michael expressing concern about the twins feeling displaced by their half-sister. Instead, Lucas and Lily had embraced their role as older siblings with enthusiasm. Lucas reading earnestly to the baby Ati, Lily performing elaborate shows for her appreciative audience. "Why, she's gotten so big," Michael commented, nodding toward Emma, who was now attempting escape from her stroller. "Growing too fast," Deborah agreed, unbuckling her youngest. "Just like these two," as the twins led Michael to show him their playground accomplishments. Alexander helped Emma toddle after her siblings. Deborah watched her blended family, not perfect, not without complications, but whole in its own way. The path here had been neither straight nor easy. There were still difficult days, disagreements with Michael over parenting approaches, challenges balancing work and family, the everyday complexities of raising 3 children in a blended household. Yet sitting on this playground bench, on a rare sunny Seattle afternoon, Deborah felt profound gratitude for the journey. The betrayal that once seemed like the end of her world had instead been the beginning of something stronger, richer, and more authentic than the perfect life she'd thought she wanted. Her phone buzzed with a work email, Mindful Tech's latest acquisition offer for another family-focused startup. The boundaries between work and family remained permeable, just as Little Bridges advocated. Deborah tucked the phone away. The email could wait until Monday. Some bridges were meant to be crossed deliberately, with careful attention to what mattered most. Lily's laughter rang across the playground as Michael pushed her ever higher on the swing, Lucas waited patiently for his turn, and Emma took tentative steps with Alexander's gentle guidance. Deborah rose to join them, stepping into the beautiful complexity of the life she had built from broken pieces, imperfect but sturdy, like Lucas's sandcastles, and joyful in its resilience, like Lily's fearless leaps. What did you think of the story? Leave a comment and a review about this story. If you were moved and enjoyed our work, feel free to help us continue producing. I invite you to click on our link in the first pinned comment. Now, two buttons will appear. One to subscribe, if you haven't already, and the other to watch other interesting stories. Choose one. Thank you for watching this far. See you soon.